So in 1906, he went to Rome to do his doctorate in philosophy. He was there 3 years in Rome. And at the end of this period, he was very sick. So he was, the prior of the house said to him not to go for the exam because he had been in bed for 1 month. But he was a little bit stubborn. So he decided to do the exam, and he failed. And that was a big humiliation for him. So he had to do the exam after 3 months in October. And so when he was giving a talk, a conference, and he was introduced, Father Titus Brandsma, Carmelite, professor in the university, he did his doctorate in Rome. He always said, but in the second possibility, because I failed the first one. So he was joking about it. But it was a big humiliation for him. After that, he went back to Rome, to Holland, and he was working very hard in different fields, in different works. For instance, he was working very strong in Christian education, Catholic education. There was no Catholic schools in Holland because it's a Protestant country, and therefore he was a pioneer of Catholic education. There in India, you have a Carmelite school, or both the St. Thomas province and the General Delegation or General Commissariat. So you are familiarized with the Catholic education, but in Holland at that time was very strange. And it was very strange also in the Carmelite family, in the Carmelite order. We are not Salesians, or we are not Jesuits. We are not used to have schools. We are more about spirituality and mysticism and so on. So this is not our work, our job. But he was a pioneer. So he said, well, it's not common in Holland, it's not common in the order, but he created several Carmelite schools that are still working today. So he was a pioneer in the field of education. He was also a pioneer in the field of Carmelite media, mass media. He understood that the church in the future, so this where we are living now, should be in mass media, not only in the churches, not only preaching, but also in the newspapers, in radio, and so on. In that time, there was no television, no internet, but he understood from the very beginning that the church should be in the mass media. You know, it's important to be there. And therefore, he was a good journalist. He had the professional card of journalism. He was the editor of one of the most important newspapers in Holland, the Stad Os. That was the name of the newspaper. He also reflected on the role of journalism in modern societies. And that was the reason why he was arrested and he was taken to the concentration camp. Because when the Germans invaded Holland in 1940, the German government, the Nazi government, imposed the Catholic journals to publish the Nazis' propaganda. So every newspaper, every journal had to publish the Nazis' propaganda. So the Dutch bishops in Holland said, no, we cannot publish that because it was racist propaganda against the Jewish population. It was, so the bishops said we cannot publish that. But Titus Brandsma was in charge of that Christian or Catholic journalism, and he had to visit the different editors of the newspapers saying you cannot publish the Nazis' propaganda. So that was, he was arrested in 1942 and he was taken into jail. So he was a pioneer in education. He was a pioneer in mass media, communication. He was also a pioneer in ecumenism. As I have said to you, Holland was a very Protestant country, a very Calvinist country. Today, Holland is a very, very secularized country, very liberal, many people without any religion. It's probably the most secularized country in Europe. And Titus Brandsma had the intuition that Catholic and Protestants, we share, our beliefs. We all believe in Christ, we all believe in God, we all believe in the gospel, in the Bible. So there are many, many things that we share together. We are the same religion. We have different denominations, but we are the same religion. And therefore, he was very active in ecumenism, in recognizing each other and knowing better each other and many other things. That's why during his life, he was always very close to not only to the Protestants, but also to the Orthodox and to the Greek and Eastern churches. He was a pioneer because in that time, in the 20s, in the 30s, the Catholic Church was very late and was very reluctant for ecumenism. After Second Vatican Council, we were much more open to ecumenism. But in that time, in those years, it was not common in the Catholic Church to have this ecumenical approach. So Titus Brandsma was a real pioneer in the field of ecumenism. That's why in the beatification process, several Protestants testify and are witnesses for his holiness. For instance, there is a Protestant pastor who received the invitation to declare, to witness about Titus, and he said the following words: "Thank you very much for the invitation." He wrote to the order, "Thank you very much for the invitation, but as you know, I am Protestant, and so we don't believe in canonizations or beatifications. But I can say that I knew Titus Brandsma, and that man was touched by the grace of God. And I hope to be worthy to be with him in heaven." So a very, very nice witness. So we don't believe in beatifications, but I can testify, I can declare that that man, Titus Brandsma, was touched by the grace of God. And I hope that I will be worthy to be with him in heaven. So many Protestants declared in the beatification process, and that's very nice in my opinion. So I repeat, he was a pioneer in education, pioneer in mass media and communication, and pioneer in ecumenism. What else can we say about Titus Brandsma? He was a man of reconciliation. That's also very important. He was a man of reconciliation, a man of dialogue. He was a man of understanding each other, and this is also a very actual witness for our times. Imagine now we have the war in Ukraine, a terrible situation, and almost danger of a world war. So we need these witnesses of reconciliation, of dialogue, of peace. He had a very interesting conference in 1932 about the message, the Christian message of peace. We Christians, we have to be men and women of peace, men and women of understanding, of reconciliation. We cannot follow the dynamics of violence and war, and we call Jesus the Prince of Peace. So we have to be good disciples of Jesus, and to find, together with other believers, we have to find ways of peace, and we have to work for peace. In that sense, it's very interesting that Titus Brandsma was enthusiastic about, and I don't know if you know this word, very enthusiastic about Esperanto. Have you ever heard about this Esperanto? Do you know the word? Probably not.
Oh.
No, okay. Esperanto was an artificial language created by Ludwig Zamenhof. Ludwig Zamenhof created in the 20s in Belarus, in the White Russia, created an artificial language. The name was Esperanto. And he created that language because in that part of Europe, there were many languages. There were Russian, German, Polish, Yiddish. Yiddish was the old language of the Jewish population in Europe. So there were 4, 5, 6 languages. And languages created division. So people were angry about each other because different languages. Oh no, we are in Russia, we have to speak Russian. No, but we are Polish, we want to speak Polish. Or we are Germans, we want to speak German. So it was a very sensitive topic, the different languages. In India, you are used to have many languages. You have Malayalam and you have many other languages. But in this part of the world, that was a big tension. So this fellow, Ludwig Zamenhof, he created an artificial language, and the name was Esperanto. Esperanto didn't succeed, because it was artificial, it was not popular. Only in 2 fields, Esperanto was very successful. First one was in anarchism, the anarchist. No borders, no government, the anarchistic message. So they loved Esperanto, to have a language that is common to everybody. We don't want divisions, we don't know borders. So it's nice to have a common language. And the second field in which, so the first one was the anarchist politicians, they were pro-Esperanto. In the second field was the Catholic Church, because Catholic in Greek means universal. Catholic Church, universal church. So Esperanto was universal language for everybody. No imposition, no colonialism. We all speak English, but this is the colonial language. I don't like it. I prefer my own language. So Esperanto is neutral. No colonialism, no. So Father Titus Brandsma was very enthusiastic about Esperanto, and the other brethren were laughing at him. Oh, Titus, Esperanto is an invention, it's ridiculous, who is interested in that? But he was very keen, very enthusiastic of Esperanto. And that says a lot of his mentality, of his attitude, so he was a man of understanding. And that's why he loved that language. He wanted to understand each other, to listen each other, to create dialogue, to create encounter. This is a very typical element of Titus Brandsma spirituality. Another field, so education, communication, ecumenism, reconciliation and dialogue. And the 5th element could be Carmelite spirituality and Carmelite tradition. He was in love with Carmelite spirituality. He was enthusiastic. He was passionate. He had passion for our tradition, for our spirituality, for our symbols. for our saints, for our history. He was in love. And I think this is very important for our times, because imagine if you live your Carmelite life without passion. This is very sad. Your whole life, you are going to give your life to something that you are not in love with. So you have to be passionate, you know, our history, our symbols, our tradition. He was a very passionate Carmelite, and I think this is really very, very important and very nice for our times. What happened with Father Titus? In May 1940, the German army invaded Holland like this. In few days, they invaded Holland. It was a very, very powerful army, and they got into the country very quickly. So at the beginning, the German government, the occupation government, pretended to be respectful with the Dutch autonomy. So they pretended to be, you know, Holland is also an Aryan race country, so they are not Jewish, they are not Mediterranean, they are not, Nazis were very racist. So Holland and German, we are brother countries, and so they pretended to be respectful. It's a rich country, it's a very cultivated country, they have a lot of culture and so on. So they pretended to respect the country, but little by little they were provoking oppression, especially of the Jewish population. They were producing different laws that were, let us say, creating oppression for the Jewish population. And that's why Titus Brandsma got in conflict with the occupation government, because he was working in two very sensitive fields. The first one is education. So the German government wanted to expel the Jewish children from our schools, from the Carmelite schools, and Titus Brandsma didn't obey that order. The Jewish children would continue in our schools, they were not expelled. And the second field is in journalism, so newspapers, communication. Every totalitarian government tries to control education and communication. And those were the realms, the fields in which Titus Brandsma was working. So that was, they couldn't avoid that conflict, because they were pushing just in the two fields that Titus Brandsma was working, education and communication. And that's why in January 1942, Titus Brandsma was arrested. He was taken to the jail, to the prison in Scheveningen, near The Hague. The Hague is a very famous place for the International Tribunal of Human Rights. But in that time there was a famous jail there, a famous prison. Titus Brandsma was there for 6 weeks. He was in a cell alone, in a very humid and very cold. That winter was terribly cold in Europe, so he was living there. And he wrote many things during those 6 weeks. For instance, he wrote a famous paper called My Diary. So he wrote my diary, what I do every day. When I wake up, there is no light, I pray the rosary, and I say the Mass in Latin, and I have the spiritual communion, because he was not allowed to communicate, to have the Holy Communion. He wrote the famous poem, Before the Image of Jesus in My Cell, That was a very famous poem he wrote there, a mystical poem. He wrote a little essay about why the Catholic in Holland are against national socialism. He wrote that little article about that. And he started the biography of Saint Teresa of Avila. He was very devotee and he was a great admirer of Teresa of Avila. He was translating the works of Teresa into Dutch. So he was writing a little biography of Teresa. Do you know something? When the authorities of the jail didn't allow him to use paper, because paper was very expensive and during the war, he continued writing the biography of Teresa between the lines of another book. He had a book that was the life of Jesus, so he continued writing the biography of Teresa between the lines of this book. And I used to say that this is one of the most touching moments of the history of Carmel in the 20th century, because it was the life of Titus Brandsma, the life of Teresa of Avila, and the life of Jesus linked together in a jail, in a place of suffering and violation of human rights. So it's a very powerful sign of Carmel in the 20th century. He was there for 6 weeks. After that, he was sent to the concentration camp of Amersfoort, that is still in Holland. In that place, I think Titus Brandsma had what we could say the dark night. It was a terrible place. He was sad there. He was weak. He was sick. It was a terrible place. He had to go outside to work, sometimes snowing and raining and so on. He was not young at that time, so it was a difficult time. And after that, he went back to Scheveningen, and the German officer who interrogated him said to him that, do you reject what you have said about us, or you will go to the concentration camp? So he said, no, I cannot reject what I said. I don't want to deny what I said. And we Catholics, we are respectful with the government, but when the government is against the most basic principles of Catholicism, we have to say no, and we accept the consequences of our behavior. So the German officer said to him, okay, if that is your last word, take the telephone, call your prior, and say to him that you are going to the concentration camp of Dachau. That was one of the most terrible concentration camps in the Nazis system. So he was sent there to Dachau. He arrived the 12th June, and it was a terrible place. There had been 11 Carmelites in Dachau. 2 of them, Polish, had died before Titus arrived. They celebrated there the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. That was a very nice celebration, because the only thing they could do was to say hello to each other, because it was forbidden, any celebration. And he died there the 26th of July, 1942. The nurse who put him the injection gave a very nice witness about Titus Brandsma. She said, that poor man, that sick man, looked at me with compassion. She was killing him, but she remembers that he was looking at her with compassion. He was always very how could I say, very gentle, even in the concentration camp. He never was cursing or against the Germans or whatever. He was a man of reconciliation even there. He was a man of gentleness, tenderness, prayer, even in the concentration camp. And that's why he left such a witness of such a remembrance of a holy man, even in that terrible place in which so many people were dying every day. He was beatified in 1985. Pope John Paul II beatified him. And next 15th May, he will be canonized by Pope Francis. I have to leave in 5 minutes, but let me tell you something. What is the example of Titus Brandsma for us? What is the main message? There are many elements of his witness. The first of all is what I have already mentioned, is this passion for religious life and for Carmelite life. To fall in love with Carmel, that's very important, If someone is not in love with his wife, life is a torture. Imagine someone who gets married, but he's not really in love with his wife. Life becomes a torture. Life is terrible for that man. The same happens in religious life. Novitiate is the period of falling in love, with the charism, with the spirituality, with our saints, with our history. It's the moment in which we have to fall in love with our Carmelite spirituality. So use this year the best as possible. Enjoy the year of novitiate. Sometimes novitiate is a little bit long, but it's a very important period in your Carmelite life. The second thing is very important is to develop this culture of reconciliation. We live in a very violent world. We thought war was something of history, something past, but we have now a war in Europe, not in Africa, in Europe. So Europe pretend to be the center of the world and so on. And look at that, we have a war there, a terrible war with terrible crimes and so on. So that means we have to be very careful all over the world. We have to be very careful with the culture of violence, war, oppression, violation of human rights. Well, so we Carmelite, we should be men of justice, peace, reconciliation, and fraternity among human beings. And this is also very, very important. Third, Titus was a man of prayer, a man of spirituality.